Hey everyone, I'm Meredith Holly. I'm a lawyer, certified life coach, and best-selling author. I help women stop sexual harassment without quitting their jobs, and one of the ways that I do that is by helping companies create a healthy workplace culture so that you can stop things far ahead of time before an employee has to stop sexual harassment. So today I want to talk to you about the one thing that makes it, hey Betsy, let me know if you can hear me. The one thing that makes it harder for companies that are like good companies to um to stop to create a healthy workplace culture. This is what I'm trying to say. Okay, so the first thing that we want to ask is what makes a company a good company and what makes a company a bad company. What I think of with this is like um, when the complaints. I don't know if you all had this experience, but when the complaints, when the complaints first came out about Uber, that Uber executives were being accused of sexual harassment and of cover-ups. Hey, Elio. I had a lot of people, I was traveling at the time, I was at conferences, and people would say, oh, we need to take Lyft, not Uber, to wherever we're going because Uber is a bad company and Lyft is a good company. And so my takeaway was when we're thinking about a good company or a bad company, I think that we're like calling companies bad when we're thinking of them as treating employees as just like widgets that are there to make money, not like humans, treating employees like numbers. We're looking at companies that are only interested in short-term success, not long-term impact. And then we think of good companies as a company that cares about the impact that they're making in the world, about what they're creating, a company that's willing to invest short term to make long term benefits, and a company that cares about its employees and its employees' health and what their experience of the company is. And partly because the companies often know that when employees are healthy, when they have a healthy culture, they're more productive and more effective. In the research, this like plays out. So there was a Harvard research study last year that said one incident of a complaint of sexual harassment that goes into the news affects the entire public image of that company. So when the public hears about one example of sexual harassment, the public starts to think, oh, this is a bad company. There's something like systemic that's wrong with this company that's making it bad. But then the research study also showed that if the company responded effectively, if they cared about the employee's experience, if they gave good information and had a positive response, like an effective response to the harassment, then it reduced the public image the public perception that it was a bad company, right? So what this shows is that we are like the public perception around sexual harassment can be pretty severe and pretty extreme. Just the idea that sexual harassment is happening in a company at all can make the public think that your entire work, your entire company is bad. Or what I see also happen is like we think that it's what's the word I'm looking for? Hypocritical. That even if especially if the company was doing good work, that now suddenly we realize that there was this dark underbelly of this company that was hypocritical. So Deanne's saying, amazing illustration of what you do and how it benefits those who you serve and the bigger picture of what's possible. Thank you. Okay, so two examples came up within the past couple months of this, of like a good company, a company that we think of as making progress, doing good in the world, having sexual harassment allegations and responding to them, and like what the public perception is around that. The most recent one was the Southern Poverty Law Center had employees come forward and say, there's racism and sexism happening in the Southern Poverty Law Center. So the Southern Poverty Law Center does like really amazing work fighting discrimination. And so to have employees come forward and say, we're experiencing discrimination while we're fighting discrimination, makes it seem like the Southern Poverty Law Center is not actually interested in solving the problem that it is saying to the public that it's solving, right? Very likely, well, who knows what the reality is. The other example is actually the Time's Up movement. I don't know if you all know about the Time's Up movement, but it's a fund that Hollywood actresses created to raise money to fund sexual harassment lawsuits. So a couple months ago, I think it was the CEO of Time's Up, her son was accused of sexual harassment and she was forced to resign. Southern Poverty Law Center, the CEO was resigned recently because of the allegations. And so sometimes a resignation can be a fair response to a sexual harassment situation, but what often happens in our brains is we think maybe the Southern Poverty Law Center isn't actually doing good work. It might actually be bad. Maybe Time's Up is infected with a cultural problem and it's part of the problem, not part of the solution. And that's usually not really true. What we need to do is separate the good work that a company is doing in the world from the harassment discrimination experience. So what we know is that 81% of women say that they've experienced sexual harassment. 38% of women say that they've experienced sexual harassment in the workplace, and about 1 in 5 women says that she has left a career because of sexual harassment. This problem is much worse when it comes to race, and I just haven't been able to find as good of polling data around it, but we know that the EEOC, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, receives about 3,000 or 4,000 more complaints a year about race than about sex. And so this problem is worse when it comes to race issues. Anytime you have a crossover issue, disability, sexual orientation, we don't have great numbers about this, but we have better numbers. You can kind of extrapolate from the sexual harassment numbers. So if 1 in 5 women is leaving a career because of sexual harassment, it is not really mathematically possible that this is only happening in companies that are like out to get employees, that have systemic problems, or it would say that like most of our companies are having these problems, right? Like almost 40% of women experiencing sexual harassment at work means that it's not just bad, evil companies where this is happening. We see the examples of the Southern Poverty Law Center. We see the examples of Time's Up movement where they are actively trying to fight these things and having their own problems. So most companies are having problems like this, and we haven't really in the past had the tools to deal with it and to address it ahead of time, to create a healthy workplace culture so that people can take preventative steps. So there's actually this extra hurdle that good companies that are willing to invest short-term to create long-term impact, that care about the impact that they have, that care about their employees, there's an extra hurdle that these companies face compared to companies that do just treat their employees like numbers, like ways to create more money within the company. And so when we are looking for, like what we're typically doing in these situations is we're kind of hunting for the evil person that's creating the sexual harassment. And we think if I have a good company, I can't have an evil person creating sexual harassment. And that's not usually how sexual harassment happens or plays out. And it just doesn't work to be looking for the evil person instead of training your employees to respond and to protect themselves and to create a healthy environment. So the reason it doesn't work to be like looking for the evil company, looking for the evil person within a good company even, is like you have to wait to have the harassment happen before you start taking steps to create a good company culture. If you're having to wait to find the harasser in order to take preventative steps, right? And then the other thing that happens is, like, as we all know, in any harassment discrimination situation, often there are multiple perspectives on what happened, and this ends up protecting the harassment more often than not. And this is because our brains just work like that. Our brain uses the halo effect and confirmation bias to make us not see harassment and discrimination. So the halo effect is when we see somebody do one good thing, we think that everything that they do should be good. So we see somebody who's a great dad playing with their kid in the park, and then a coworker comes to us and says, that guy made me uncomfortable the other day, and we think, not that guy, that couldn't have happened, because of the halo effect, because we saw him do one good thing, and so we think that harassment and discrimination couldn't happen with him. We think another thing that we think is bad couldn't happen with him. And then we have confirmation bias. So then we see the evidence of what we already believe, and it's really hard to get our brains to change at this point. So waiting to find the bad person is not ever, it hasn't worked so far. And it also forces us to say, like, this person is, we have to prove this person is evil before we can acknowledge harassment and discrimination. And really, all of our brains have discrimination. And so we need to all be actively looking at our own part in discrimination, our own part even in discriminating against ourselves in self-abuse. The other problem with looking for the bad person is that people want to tolerate different behavior. So what harassing sometimes to one person is not harassing to another person. So for example, if one woman is flirting with one guy, he might like her, and if she's flirting with another guy, he might not like her, and it might feel aggressive and harassing, right? It doesn't mean that she's acting appropriately just because one person likes it. A joke might be funny to me that is not funny to somebody else, and that is offensive to somebody else. So if we have to prove that somebody's evil before we can address inappropriate jokes, touching in the workplace that is not safe, all of these issues, whatever we want to tolerate, that it just isn't going to happen, right? We're waiting for something that we're not going to find, and it's just not working. So we know from EEOC statistics that about 75% of harassment and discrimination goes unreported. And so what I see is that instead of waiting to find the bad, evil person, what we need to do is we need to train employees to be willing to stop behavior that they don't want to tolerate and that is draining to productivity, that's not effective in your workplace, and then train them to feel comfortable and create an environment where it is comfortable and possible to report behavior that they are not able to stop themselves. So I'm getting to the thing of why it's harder for good companies. So just the fact that we talk about this as evil versus good in companies and with employees sets us up to fail, because people who are doing one good thing can also be experiencing or creating harassment and discrimination. So the reason that this is harder for good companies is that when employees are really invested in their work, when they really want to be in their jobs, and they want to prove themselves, they are less likely to be willing to tell you there's a problem. So I'm going to give you an example of this. So imagine there's this young woman and she gets her dream job in a nonprofit advocating for children with developmental disabilities. And she is so excited. There's really not another job like this in her area. It's such a privilege. And so she goes into the workplace and someone says something mean to her, but kind of like making fun of her body, right? Like, oh, you're wearing that dress today? And it bothers her and she feels a little weird about it. But she doesn't want to be a whiner. So she says something to her supervisor like, has that guy ever made comments about your clothes before? And the supervisor says, oh, that's just him. It's just a joke. It's no big deal. So then the employee thinks, oh, it's no big deal. I shouldn't be a whiner. I shouldn't care about this. And then it gets worse and worse until the guy is making jokes about her breasts and saying that they're too small and asking her about her sex life. And it feels really invasive and really scary to her, but she's already learned that's just him. And she doesn't want to be a whiner and talking about it. Plus, because that can happen in any company. Plus, she doesn't want to take away from the work that everybody's doing to help these children with developmental disabilities, right? She knows that the guy that's making comments about her is really good at his job. She doesn't want him to be taken out of the company or people to overreact. She doesn't want to overreact. And so she just doesn't say anything. And then she starts feeling anxiety and she's distracted at work because she's always worried about running into him. But since she thinks she's the problem for caring about this, she's not going to say anything about it because it'll hurt the children, right? She thinks that if she says anything, she's actually going to hurt somebody. Her hair starts falling out. She starts experiencing panic attacks, but she still wants to prove that she can cut it in this job. She still wants to prove that she's good enough. And she starts talking to her friends and saying, these things happen in my workplace and they're pretty scary to me, but is it bad enough for me to quit yet? And she's talking about your company as though she needs to prove that your company is bad enough for her to leave. But all she's experiencing is fear. And she doesn't see it as talking about your company being bad. She just is trying to survive, right? She sees this person in her workplace as a physical threat to her. And then she leaves ultimately because she knows she can't complain because she doesn't want to be a whiner. She thinks that if she complains, it'll detract from the work that the company is doing for the children. In companies that are more focused on the bottom line, on money, on some kind of product that the employee is not as invested in, that where it's like just a job, a lot of employees are more willing to complain about minor things in the workplace where you will find out about issues early on, and where you'll be able to address them early on. And employees will come, they're more likely to come to a supervisor and say, this needs to stop now, or I'm going to leave to work at another company where it's just a job. In a company where the employees are passionate about the work, where they feel privileged to be there, where it is their dream job, they don't want to detract from the message the company is sending. And so if you are a manager, if you are a supervisor, if you have employees or a business in a situation like this where you are doing amazing work in the world, where it's a creative company that people feel privileged to be in, where it's a nonprofit that's helping people, where you just are doing good work in the world, you need to be extra proactive to diagnose your company culture and create a healthy company culture for your employees and create a safe space for them to talk about problems because they are extra unlikely to bring it up themselves. The overall statistics are that 75% of these incidents get unreported, but I believe that it's even higher in situations like Southern Poverty Law Center, like Time's Up movement. So don't wait for employees to complain before you start creating a healthy workplace culture. So one of the ways that I'm trying to contribute to that I am contributing to it, is I've started a group of cultural health facilitators. And what they do is they're in a workplace, they're in a business situation, and they have the tools to teach employees about power dynamics so that they can effectively stop situations before they become national news headlines, before you start losing employees because there's such an infection in the company. So on Thursday at 2 p.m., I'm going to do a webinar. If you'd like a link to join, send me a message or comment in this Facebook Live. And I'm going to tell you what it means to create a healthy workplace culture in your company, how to become a Power Dynamics facilitator, and yeah, the components of making sure that you diagnose and effectively respond to these situations before they turn bad. Thanks for watching, everyone.